People are not going to spend 26 euros plus shipping to order a thing that they might not like. Smaller distributors I can call up and say, how's it going? What do you need from us? Can I come visit you in the market? We do a trip together. Hey, this person reached out to us on Instagram. Can you follow up with them? They are true partners in building the brand.
I've been lucky enough to speak to some of the hottest beverage startups in the market, but this one has been in my list for a while. IESSI is completely redefining how you build a brand in the beverage industry, setting completely new standards in terms of visual approach, distribution, and content.
We think about the alcohol-free market as booming and growing, and it is, but it's still tiny relative to how big it could be, which means that there's a lot of education to be done every day. I would much rather that the product that they try be one of my competitors, but be a really good product, so that they try and they go, oh, this is good. Or they go, not for me, but I see why this is good. Let me test everything else until I find the thing that's for me. And then hopefully they find IESSI.
I'm honestly so excited about this episode, and I think it's a true masterclass for anyone building or growing a brand in the beverage industry. But before we start, listeners, if you enjoy the show, if you think it's been useful for you in some way, or if you're enjoying the guests that we are bringing, consider subscribing to the show on your favorite platform and leaving us a comment or a review on Spotify. That's the easiest way to tell us that you are liking the show and to help us grow it. So without further ado, thank you so much and enjoy the show. Hey Nicolas, welcome on Dolia Talks.
Hi Giovanni, how are you?
Very good, thank you very much. So I would like to jump in really from a conversation we had last time we spoke, and you told me you started IESSI without having any previous experience in the beverage industry. So.
Not just any previous experience, let's say no real business plan, no previous experience, but I had an idea and a project that I was passionate about, and I think that can carry you through quite a lot, especially at the beginning.
Walk us through a bit how the beginning looked like, because without any knowledge, skills, network in the industry, I guess it can get pretty ugly, no?
Not ugly, just you make a fool of yourself. But people honestly in this industry are very forgiving, and they're very generous with their time, with their knowledge. So very quickly you learn, people help you out. But sure, so to talk about the beginning of IESSI, I live in Paris. I was working as a financial controller at L'Oréal, so nothing to do with the beverage industry. And during lockdown, during COVID, I don't know, had this idea that, well, first I wanted to sort of cut back my drinking, my consumption, because I think like a lot of people, you start out the lockdown and all you do is drink, and then very quickly you sort of go like, wait a second, something's not quite right. I don't like this. And then so you kind of swing in the other direction before finding a healthy medium. But of course, you know, at that moment, so we're talking like it's 2020, 2021, there wasn't really a lot yet in France in terms of alcohol-free aperitifs, right? I could see that in the US, there were brands that were coming up. I could see that in the UK, there were some interesting things happening, and they hadn't made it to France yet. And at the same time, I had this family recipe from my grandmother, right? My family's from Udine in Friuli, in the northeast of Italy. And my grandmother makes this homemade amaro, right? Like she makes her homemade limoncello, coffee liqueur, and amaro. So that's something I'd always sort of tinkered with. I had her recipe, and you know, it's very simple. You take a bunch of different herbs and botanicals and infuse them in alcohol, and then you dilute it with sugar and water. So that's something I'd always done in my kitchen. Makes a really good gift. It's always fun. After a dinner party, you pull it out, go, here's my homemade amaro. And I sort of started to question, like, okay, when I'm not drinking, but I want something to mark the end of the day or move into the evening, what is it that I'm really looking for? What do I really want? And it was that. It was Nonna Edda's amaro, you know, maybe with a little bit of tonic or soda water. So, you know, you have time on your hands, and you think, okay, well, let's see if we can make an alcohol-free version of this. And very quickly I realized, like, it's one thing in your kitchen, it's a whole other thing if then you have to start thinking about like, oh, like I want to scale this. I want to do it at a quote unquote industrial level, right? So I had a sort of idea of what I wanted to do and this crazy project. But again, at that point, it was still just a project. I really wasn't sure anything was going to come of it, you know? And so I was working full time, you know. As time went on, we went back to the office, but I was still sort of during my lunch breaks, in the evenings, on weekends, reaching out to different, you know, co-packers, distilleries, trying to understand like, how does this industry work? If you wanted to develop a product, what would that look like, and who can help you do it? And I was very lucky to find a distillery, a small family-run distillery in Trieste, so not far from where my grandparents are in Udine. They thought it was kind of a funny project, and they were willing to help me out. So we start working, and you know, they're making samples, they're sending them to me in Paris, I'm giving them notes. And sort of very quickly, we got to the point where they'd done a surprisingly good job. Like they'd really taken this recipe. The nonna does amaro and made an alcohol-free version of it. And I remember at one point I was in Trieste. We were doing tastings, and there was a guy who works in the distillery who turned to me and he said, Nicholas, I only smoke when I drink, but when I drink this, I crave a cigarette. And I was like, okay, stop, don't touch anything. We've got it. We're good. And so then I found myself in this really funny situation of having this amazing product, but nothing else, And so I was sort of like, okay, well, screw it. Let's try, what's the worst that can happen? So I took a sabbatical from my job at L'Oréal, and I said, look, let's develop the branding. Let's figure out what the packaging is going to look like. Let's build the website, and let's start to try and understand how this business works.
And at what point did you realize there was actually an opportunity in the market? Because the story until now, it seems like, okay, you developed something that you liked, that you wanted to have fun with, but at some point you must have realized, okay, actually this can be a business, this can be something that makes money.
I mean, in the back of my head, I always had this understanding that there was this opportunity, because right on the first hand, I know from experience that every trend that becomes really big in the States eventually makes it to the UK and then eventually makes it to France, right? We're always, let's call it 5 years behind. So, kind of looking at what was happening in the States, I thought, like, if this trend is like every other trend that I've seen come to France, it will arrive, and it has already arrived. But again, in 2021, it hadn't yet. So there was that sort of insight. But fundamentally, I was really making a product for myself. I kind of had the intuition that, okay, if this is something I would want to drink, there must be other people like me who have similar taste who would also want to drink it, who are curious about alcohol-free products, but haven't found something that really speaks to them, their tastes, their consumption habits.
And did you have a specific customer type in mind before starting? You mentioned, for example, you wanted to reduce your alcohol intake. So did you start with an idea of what the ideal customer of IESSI would be? And if yes, then did it change over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. To the extent that we had a persona in mind, right? Who's your avatar? Who's your persona? It was essentially me, right? Someone in their early 30s, maybe even to, we're sort of thinking like older millennials, so maybe like 25 or 28, 29 to 44, kind of in that age bracket, probably lives in Paris, probably is someone who appreciates cocktail culture, drinking, going out, but for whatever reason is looking to cut back, whether it's just that night or that week or that month or that year, right? We designed IESSI with we very sort of explicitly took design inspiration in our branding from the premium spirits world, right? And not the sort of wellness world, right? We didn't want to be associated with sodas. We didn't want to be associated with kombuchas. We really wanted to be associated with spirits. And so that, I think, speaks to who our ideal customer was, right? It was someone who appreciates good cocktail bars, good cocktails, going out, a bit of a foodie, maybe even if they're not an expert. And then to the extent that it's changed, I mean, something that we found really interesting is, obviously, you're always surprised by who your customers are, especially with e-commerce. You put out marketing material thinking you're speaking to essentially your own peers. And then you have, one of our best customers is a older woman who lives in Brittany, who works in the city hall, right? Like, never would I've imagined that she would be one of our best customers. And yes, she is, and it's amazing. And I love her for that. Yeah. But of course, we also then work with lots of chefs and bartenders. So yeah, we it's not so much that our idea of who our customer has changed. It's more that our sort of channel priorities have changed, right? I launched IESSI with this idea that, and maybe this is sort of an American perception because I grew up partially in the States. You create a consumer packaged goods. You build a nice website. You put it up. You do a little bit of meta ads. And boom, the whole thing takes off, and it's just you have an e-commerce business. Not at all, right? Like today, our clients are sommelier, chefs, bartenders, right? Most of our business, 80% of our business is done on-premise, B2B.
Okay. And I'm interested in also because you mentioned a bit the European market is 5 years behind the US. And of course, you are starting from France, which is traditionally a wine and spirit-centric country. No? So which kind of pushbacks, if any, did you have in the very beginning? Because I can imagine like distributors or consumers tend to struggle a bit with these kind of new things, especially in countries like Italy, where I'm from, and you are partly from, and France.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, you still do get some of that pushback, right? But I was surprised at how receptive people were, even in 2023 when we first launched at the very end of the year. I think we got really lucky. The timing was perfect. At the end of 2023, there were not yet a ton of products on the market, but people who were looking at what was happening elsewhere in the UK, in the US, in the Nordics, in France, I mean, were starting to realize that there was a real gap in what they were offering to their clients. So, when I walk into a, sort of high-end, let's call it, say, wine bar, gastronomic restaurant, sort of trendy bistro, and I present myself and I say, hey, my name is Nicolas, I have IESSI, alcohol-free Italian aperitifs. Even a couple of years ago, people, to the extent that they were hesitant, were saying, oh yeah, like we know we need alcohol-free options. We know that this is sort of the new frontier in hospitality, but maybe they said, it doesn't really fit with our menu. It's too bitter. It's too Italian. We don't do cocktails. So it was more a product fit, not necessarily a category pushback. And of course, you still do get, if you go into if you go into a more traditional French bistro, yeah, they'll laugh at your face when you try to sell them an alcohol-free product. But those are not our clients, and maybe one day they will be. But for now, we have an amazing community, and so it's. I feel like I'm very lucky to have launched IESSI in this particular moment, in this particular market.
Yeah, and did the brand help? Because I will show it on the screen here, because it's I think one of the most recognizable ones in the market at the moment. And as you mentioned, it has nothing to do with all the wellness, green, blue. It's flashy. You see it. It's bold. And so I'm wondering, did it help, especially in the initial phases, to get really into the market fast?
Definitely, the fact that we put a lot of effort into our branding, we have a really premium packaging, was very helpful when getting our first clients. We really designed, especially the label of the aperitivo, we really designed it with the idea being that we wanted it to pop when you put it on the back bar. And it does. When you walk into a bar that serves IESSI, all you see is l'aperitivo. At least all I see. Maybe I'm a bit more conditioned.
You are a bit biased.
Yeah. So the premium branding was really an important asset for us when we were first starting out, because of course, your first, let's say, 100 clients, okay, you go to them and you say, but we work with this other client and this other client and this cool bar and this Michelin restaurant, and they look at you and they say like, okay, but what can you do for me? And the truth is, what you can do for them is you can help them serve a customer that otherwise wouldn't be buying something, wouldn't be ordering a glass of wine or a cocktail. And you can help make them look good, right? The frizzante, which ready to drink, and a spritz, you put it on the table and it's cool, and people pick it up and they're like, oh, interesting, what is this? And so we really wanted to make a product that made our customers look good to their customers. And then, of course, the other thing about the visibility is now we've finally reached the stage where people start to recognize, even if they don't know the brand, when I show up or when someone shows up and pulls out a bottle, they go, oh yeah, I've seen that. And that's a real asset as well.
How long did it take from, you mentioned the first experiments and with the distillery you knew in Italy, to product launch?
Just about a year.
Okay.
Just about a year, but also remember, part of that time we were working on formulation and it was sort of a side project. I would say when I decided to really go and do it full time and make a shot of it, 6 months of packaging design, e-commerce development, and production.
It was super, super quick.
I was motivated. I also only had a year-long sabbatical, so I was sort of like, okay, I have 6 months to launch and 6 months to see how it goes and then make a decision.
Yeah. And how did the whole process of understanding the ingredients, the taste, in general, all the product, the recipe formulation work?
So we essentially, I gave to this distillery in Trieste, I gave them the original alcoholic recipe from my nonna Edda, who, by the way, has tried IESSI, has tried the aperitivo, has validated it.
Wow.
I wouldn't have launched without her saying, okay, I approve of this reinterpretation of my recipe.
Yeah, that's your biggest win, I think.
Yeah, well, Even though I do have to say she has a little bit of a difficult time understanding the concept of an alcohol-free aperitif. So she usually mixes it with a splash of prosecco or ribolla gialla.
Well.
But I'll take my wins where I
It
can get
works.
them. It works exactly. So I gave the distillery this original recipe, and I gave them a little bit some indications about what I had been trying and what I thought was a good path or not. Right, like this doesn't work. I tried it. I really am not convinced. This does work. The only constraint that I gave them was I do not want to do any dealcoholization, right? I thought it was just fundamentally seemed strange to like make an alcoholic product just to then undo it by essentially cooking it. So the brief was we need to start from a base, right? Probably of some sort of juice with also water, and then add different extracts and infusions to try and replicate that sort of layered journey, right? When we were talking about the flavor, I was always thinking about what's the journey, right? Like when you drink something, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so it was important for me, for example, that the beginning be a nice bitter attack. Like you really want to have the bitterness come through first. The middle should be a little bit more round, a bit more complex. You think, oh, okay, I taste the rhubarb, I taste the bitter orange. Interesting, all these different like layers coming up on top of each other. And then the end, I really wanted to have a kind of, I don't want to say spicy finish, but a little tiny kick, because I thought that it kind of rounded out nicely the flavor journey, and it kind of called back to the original alcoholic recipe, right? We really have the heat of the alcohol as it goes down.
Yeah, and in terms of formats, you mentioned you have the ready to drink as well, together with
Yes.
the aperitivo. I'm curious. Did you already have that in mind? Did it came from customer requests? So how did the process of ideating new formats actually happen?
We launched with both products. I knew from the beginning
Okay.
that I wanted to have both the aperitif format, right, the larger format that you can sort of use however you want, drink it by itself over ice, mix it into a cocktail, long drink, dilute it with tonic water. And again, this I think goes to my, knowing that we were launching in the French market, where certainly there are incredible cocktail bars, but also there is not that same culture as you have in, for example, the US or the UK of ordering cocktails at a restaurant. And so my thinking was like, how do I make this a product that's easy for my customers to sell? And the insight was like, okay, what's a sort of service à table drink that is iconic in France? It's a Perrier tranche, right? A bottle of Perrier. The waiter comes to the table, he puts down a glass with ice, slice of lemon, puts the bottle on the table and opens it up, and that's it. And so we're thinking, okay, well, how do you do something similar with IESSI so that clients can, our clients can then replicate exactly that same service? And that was the frizzante.
And if you could, let's say, assess a bit how the two products are going, I mean, do you think they answer to a different type of consumer, to a different type of target also in terms of restaurants? So how do you think they're performing on the different channels?
Yeah, definitely. Again, there was a lot of sort of testing and learning, understanding what corresponds to which client typology. The aperitivo works really well, obviously, in cocktail bars. That's kind of what we envisioned when we were working with it, and everything that's off premise, right? So that's your bottle shops, your épicerie, your small independent grocers. People like the idea of a big bottle that they can take home and use as they want. Of course, that's a generalization. We have lots of, restaurant clients that use the aperitivo as well. But generally, we find that restaurants, especially smaller places in Paris, most of them they don't have the staff, they don't have the space, they don't have the time to be making cocktails. And so the frizzante is a huge hit, because you go to them, you say, look, put a non-alcohol-free cocktail on the menu, put it at a similar pricing as your alcoholic cocktails, but you don't have anything to do. You just put it down on the table and serve it over ice. So with the frizzante, we work mostly with restaurants and cafes.
Do you think, I mean, maybe I'm a bit going off script here, but do you think the ready to drink has a bit less of a premium feel to it compared to the big bottle?
What do you mean in terms of on the shelf or in client experience?
From a customer perspective, because if I think when I go to a new place, a wine bar, whatever place, a restaurant, if I order maybe a cocktail made from someone, it feels a lot more premium compared if they bring me like a bottle.
Yes, I see what you're saying. And that is, I think, that's a very valid point, and I think that that's where also the branding plays an important role, because if you have a product where you put the bottle on the table, technically, even generally, people are conditioned to think of that as a soft drink. And in everything that we do, in our branding, in our communication, when I go talk to clients, I say, please, please, please do not put us on the menu with the soft drinks. Put us on the menu with the cocktails, right? Because it also conditions the way a customer is going to think about drinking your product. If IESSI frizzante is next to Coca-Cola, not that we work with a lot of restaurants that serve Coke, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Or a ginger beer, let's say, even an artisanal, locally produced ginger beer, and you order it, you kind of are expecting something that's refreshing, that you can drink kind of quickly, right? It's a different context, whereas if you're looking at the cocktail menu and you see it's a cocktail and it just happens to be alcohol-free, then all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, this is something I'm going to sip, I'm going to savor, I'm going to enjoy over several, 10s, 15 minutes, half an hour. I might only order one, right? And that's perfectly okay. In fact, very few people order more than one, because the frizzante, it's quite bitter, it's very intense, But if I go out and I'm particularly thirsty, I might order 2 ginger beers or, a sparkling water.
Yeah.
So it's a good insight.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. So let's say it plays a bit the role. I mean, maybe it's not the exact same thing, but I'm thinking of like Campari soda, or like Italians might know Crodino, like drinks like that. I mean, it feels on a different level, but in the end, the consumption moment, I think it's kind of similar, no?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, whenever I love doing tastings with Italian restaurants, because I walk in and I say, okay, perfect. Aperitivo, frizzante, Campari soda.
Yeah.
They understand also when they see the bottle of the frizzante, they make the link. They go, like Crodino, like Sanvita, like Gingerino. So even the format, the shape of the bottle sort of is our, let's call it, winking homage to that tradition that exists.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so when you mentioned you launched on e-commerce, so your first sales channel was B2C, right?
Our first sales channel was B2C because, to be perfectly honest, I was too naive to know how to do otherwise. No, that's not entirely true. We launched with an e-commerce website, and it was very exciting to get our first order. I mean, anyone who's launched a product knows, like, you launch it, I remember very vividly, we launched on a Thursday night, and Friday morning I got my first order. And of course it was like a friend, right? But when you get that little Shopify notification, it really like changes your whole like outlook on what your phone can do for you, So we launched with e-commerce, but of course, like I very quickly understood that, to build a business that has a certain amount of volume, and also because the way that people shop is slightly different from what I was imagining, right? I had this sort of maybe American perspective, and very quickly I realized actually here in France, and I think probably similarly in Italy and most other European countries, people are not going to spend 26 euros plus shipping to order a thing that they might not like. That's it's a hard ask, it's a heavy lift. And so it's sort of, you go, okay, well, what's the logical next step? Okay, well, we want to be in the places where our imagined customer can then try it and know that because it's been tasted and put on the menu by a chef, a sommelier, a bartender that they trust, that it's going to be good. And even if they don't like it, it's not because the product's not good, it's because it doesn't correspond to their taste. And so but again, our first B2B sales, working with restaurants was, me with my backpack and my bottles in my backpack, going door to door saying, hi, I'm Nicolas, can I interest you in a tasting? So very, very quickly we sort of pivoted, and we thought, okay, e-commerce will be a nice sort of showcase for the brand, but the core of our business is actually going to be working on trade.
So let's say now your main and most effective sales channel is on the B2B side.
Absolutely. Okay. And then, of course, I mean, as you know, you work direct, you work with, very local. I mean, I live in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. It's the northeast of Paris. Our first clients were all within a, 500 meter range of here. I happen to live near some very good restaurants, so I was also lucky in that sense. And of course, then the industry is very tightly knit. So once you get your first sales, then you really have a sort of snowball effect, because such and such just, you should talk to my friend. He used to be the sommelier here. He opened a new place. You should go introduce yourself. And I have to say that has really been the best part of this whole thing, is getting to, know this community and meet all these interesting people doing these very cool things. So, right, our first sales were B2B, direct. And then, of course, once you start getting a certain critical mass, then you can think about distribution as well.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how's that? I mean, you started, of course, from France. Which other markets are you started to explore?
So we really think in terms of cities, not in terms so much in terms of countries. We're not yet at the scale where we can say like we're in all of France. No, that's not true. So we've got Paris and Marseille as our two key cities in France. Bordeaux also has a very dynamic restaurant scene. So Paris, Marseille, Bordeaux. We are present in Milan as well, which is another very good market for us. Very different. It's interesting the way you really can't copy and paste what works in one city into another. The way you talk about the product, the kinds of clients that you're trying to approach are very different in Milan from the ones that we're trying to speak to in Paris.
Can you tell us a bit can you elaborate a bit on that? How's that different?
So in Milan, there are obviously the sort of like small plates, independent restaurants, and we work with all of those, or we want to work with all of those restaurants in Milan. But there's also a bit more the tradition of like the kind of classic enoteca, trattoria, that are surprisingly, contrary to what you might assume, quite open to alcohol-free. I think part of that is, they pride themselves on having a very sort of, niche and premium selection of products. And so when you show up with a, beautiful product and a nice story and a very good liquid, they're interested. I think there's also in those places, because there's the heritage of Campari Soda and Crodino, when you say, oh, it's an aperitivo analcolico, they understand what that means and what the use case is. You don't have to do that same level of education that you might have to in another market. But for example, cocktail bars in Milan have been kind of tricky for us in a way that they haven't been in Paris. And maybe that's also just a question of network and knowing the right people. But so it's interesting to see. And then our other main largest market is Vienna, actually.
Oh, wow.
It's a market that was not necessarily on our roadmap, but we were approached by a distributor that had a very premium, very interesting portfolio, and we sort of said, okay, well, why not? Let's give it a test. And then it took off. I think it's a market where people are really open to innovation, right? Open to innovation. They care about sort of the aesthetics of what it is as well, right? They want the sort of premium branding. And it's also a place where people like bitter, right? They drink Negroni, they drink Garibaldi, they drink, all those bitter cocktails, spritz even. So it's a nice fit.
Yeah. So you haven't started exploring, I don't know, markets like China or the US or other foreign markets?
No, because you know what? We're a very small team. We want to be careful about not sort of dispersing ourselves too much in terms of energy, attention. Also, I think it's valuable. We really want to focus on owning a couple key markets. Obviously, the US, we think of the US as this like El Dorado for alcohol-free, products. And maybe it is, but I think at least my conviction is that we would be better served if we one day do go to the US, being really well established as the Italian alcohol-free aperitif, the Parisian alcohol-free aperitif, right? Like I want people to think, IESSI, to think, okay, Europe, or ideally France and Italy as our sort of two kind of dual home markets.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we're like really anchored, really well established in these markets before we then start thinking about China, Japan, the US.
Interesting. Okay. And in the markets where you are actually cities where you are present at the moment, are you going through like distributors? Is it more like you going with your backpack still? How does it work?
No. That was sort of the honeymoon. No, I don't want to say honeymoon. That's the wrong word. But that was the sort of like idyllic phase of IESSI when we were doing tiny volumes and I all our clients I would deliver myself and they would call me. Thankfully we've grown, we've reached the scale where that's no longer possible. Obviously, to a certain extent, you always do that, right? Like part of my job as a brand founder is to be in the market, being present, showing up, asking how it's going. But we have too many clients for me to be doing all the deliveries by myself. So we've had to sort of grow up and leave the never ever land that was, the first couple of months, and become, a quote unquote real brand that works with distributors.
Yeah. And so the distributor, the ideal distributor for you, is it someone like the one you mentioned in Vienna, which is focused on this kind of premium brands? Or do you see IESSI also works in portfolios of more generalist distributors?
That's an interesting question. I hesitate to say like one way or the other. I think it depends on a case by case basis. If I had to generalize, I would certainly say yes. We work better in small, with smaller distributors that have a premium and specialized portfolio, for the very simple reason that those are the distributors with whom you can have real relationships, right? Our smaller distributors, I can call up and say, how's it going? What do you need from us? Can I come visit you in the market? We do a trip together. Oh, hey, this person reached out to us on Instagram. Can you follow up with them, right? They are, in that sense, they are true partners in building the brand. Whereas the larger distributors that, yes, have a huge sales force and maybe can cover the entire country, great, but then you're one product in a portfolio of 1,000, and so maybe you even do more volume just because it's a matter of sort of arithmetic, right? But they're not building the brand with you in the same way.
And since you mentioned Instagram, that was one point I wanted to go through with you, because I think your communication on social media, personally, I love it. It's the whole brand, I think it's really, it's a matter of taste, but I think it's it's super, super cool. But what I see is that you do so many like collaborations, so many events, in-person events. So can you maybe walk us through a bit how your strategy on that side on social media and communication looks like, and actually what is bringing to the brand?
Yeah, totally. And Instagram is another one of those areas where we've learned a lot. We launched, if you go back all the way through our Instagram feed at the very beginning, it was very, we were posting as if we were maybe a fashion or design studio, right? Like it was very minimalist. You almost never saw the bottle or the liquid, but it was more about this like lifestyle idea. And very quickly we realized like, actually, no, we need to be, at the end of the day, we're selling a liquid, right? So we need to show the bottle, show the liquid, show people, faces, people drinking it. So our Instagram strategy has certainly evolved over time, and we've learned what works and what doesn't. And then to your point about events and collaborations, there's no magic formula. Like, I think it's a bit of a cliche in the industry, but people are always saying like liquid to lips, right? Sponsoring events, the right kind of events, also there too, we did a lot of testing and learning, right? There are certain events where it's very flattering, even big name brands, they reach out to you and say, hey, we love IESSI, can you sponsor this event? At the beginning, you say yes because you're super flattered. And then very quickly you realize like actually in certain kinds of events, the beverage becomes an afterthought. And so it's not really worth your time and effort and product. But when it's a smaller event and when we can be present to make sure that we're talking to people about what they're drinking and explaining it, and also taking photos, so that we have something to use afterwards, then it absolutely makes sense. It's also a nice way of building community, of reinforcing connections. We have lots of amazing clients. If they reach out to me and they say like, hey, we're doing this pop-up, can you sponsor it? Of course, it's like the least that I can do. You're helping me build my brand. Let me help you, support you in what you're doing to build your restaurant or your brand. But yeah, we found that in-person events, it's frustrating because you can't scale it the way you can scale an Instagram post. But at the end of the day, like that, like personal connection really makes a difference. That's what really creates a link to the brand.
And I think, I speak also to a lot of winemakers, and in the wine industry, there's this huge conversation about hospitality, wine clubs, because now actually, since exports are a bit going down, people are starting to realize maybe we should focus on something that we have, a proprietary asset, first-party channels. But I do think, and speaking also to someone else in the industry, it seems like it's common sense that in the end, these experiences that you might organize in a winery or these wine clubs all look the same, because it's you go to the winery, you do a tasting, or you join a club, you receive some bottles. I think, and I don't know if you agree with me, but this kind of initiative that you're doing can be like an integral part, and maybe also the 100% of the hospitality, let's say, strategy of a brand, of a beverage brand.
I wouldn't say 100%, but I think it's definitely an integral part. The thing you mentioned about how all like wine clubs, they kind of these events can sort of look all the same, and I think that's an interesting point, and one that's worth mentioning is that when we think about the events that we sponsor, the events that we do, either sponsor is as a partner, or that we put on as IESSI doing this event and inviting people, we try to be really conscious about like who is the audience that we're trying to reach, right? So literally last night, we sponsored an event at this very cool cafe bike shop in Paris that's already been a client of ours. It happens to be like a cafe around the corner, one that I go to a lot. So I was also, it's like there's a personal connection, personal reason why I was very happy to sponsor the event. But they were doing the launch of a bike travel bag. So if you're doing like long trips on a bike and you need to put all your stuff, super expensive, very premium, very high end. And so on the one hand, you might say, like, Nicholas, why would you bother sponsoring that event? You're talking to like bike enthusiasts. And that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly why I want to sponsor the event. I've never spoken to a bike enthusiast before as IESSI. This is the perfect opportunity to test it out and see if it works and if people respond well. Because at the end of the day, there's like, and this goes back to the question you asked about who is our ideal client. We think we're speaking to me. Let's assume I am the ideal IESSI client. But my like interests overlap with a lot of other people. So in the Venn diagram of like all the interests that I could have, maybe cycling is one of them, and so and vice versa. Maybe people whose Venn diagram of interest focus on cycling, well, maybe alcohol-free beverages or beverages in general is also one of their sort of overlapping circles in that Venn diagram. So it's always interesting to really think about like who am I speaking to?
And if you look a bit at the market at the moment, are you afraid it's becoming a bit saturated with all these new brands popping up?
Not at all. Let me amend my answer. I often get some version of that question, right? Like the barriers to entry are relatively low. I mean, I did it, right? The barriers to entry are relatively low. You have all these big brands with, lots of money from the UK, from the US, coming over to Europe. New brands are launching every day. Aren't you concerned? No, because, or rather, aren't I concerned? As long as they are launching, as long as they're bringing good products into the market, I'm happy. I very much am a believer in the sort of rising tide lifts all boats idea. We're still, we think about the alcohol-free market as booming and growing, and it is, but it's still tiny relative to how big it could be and how big the pool of potential customers could be. Which means that there's a lot of education to be done. Every day there is someone who goes, you know what, I've been hearing all about this alcohol-free stuff. I've never tried it. Let me try whatever. And they try the first thing that happens to be in front of them: alcohol-free beer, alcohol-free wine, aperitif, whatever. I would much rather that the product that they try be one of my competitors, but be a really good product, so that they try and they go, oh, this is good. Or they go, not for me, but I see why this is good. Let me test everything else until I find the thing that's for me. And then hopefully they find IESSI, right? The worst thing that can happen is they try something and it's a not very good product. And then they go, oh, see, I was right. This is all shit. And I'm never going to pick up another bottle of alcohol-free aperitifs again.
What do you think about how we define the no alcohol industry? Because just the fact that we call it no alcohol, for me, it's not wrong, but maybe it's not the best way of defining it. So what's your view on how we are defining the industry?
We are, and in fact, you'll notice I say alcohol-free, but not non-alcoholic. I always try to make that distinction. I agree that I think it is limiting to think of the sector as just limited to alcohol-free or non-alcoholic. And in fact, if part of our ethos at IESSI is that we are not anti-alcohol, right? I enjoy a good cocktail, and frankly, I love the fact that people drink IESSI with alcohol, right? I was at the Argentinian bar in Paris not so long ago, and the bartender was saying, oh, they work with the frizzante, one of the few bars that works with the frizzante, and the bartender was saying, oh yeah, I love it. I drink frizzante with a shot of Fernet. I call it Fernet frizzante.
Wow.
And I love that. That's like perfect. But in the same way that you can use the aperitivo to make a low ABV Negroni, for example, that's also another very good selling point. You go to a bartender, you say, look, you can make a Negroni, and someone can order two instead of just the one and then be totally knocked out.
Yeah, interesting.
No, so I very much I think it's a mistake for this sector to sort of hermetically seal itself off from the alcoholic sector. Also because I see it with the distributors that we work with, our best distributors are the ones that do also, have a wide portfolio, so that you can go to a client and say, I've got your wine, I've got your spirits. Oh, by the way, I've also got alcohol-free.
And if you look in general at the whole beverage/wine market, what do you see it's happening? For example, I was speaking to another brand. It's called Feral. Maybe you know them. It's a brand from
excellent
Italy.
products. Yeah,
yeah, I love them.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, me as well. And no, the idea was that I was discussing with them is they had a lot of winemakers actually going to them asking, how can we make a product like yours? So do you also see, as it happened to you first, and do you also see the market is in general moving towards these kind of products?
So with wine specifically, I think yes. I think that the future, and this is maybe going to get me in trouble, I am skeptical of alcohol-free wines. I'm skeptical of de-alcoholized wines. I think that the future of that segment is a product like Feral. It's like more the proxies, right? So unique original creations that you drink in the same way that you would drink wine, but that isn't wine and isn't trying to be wine. There's a brand called Antidote in France that is similar, right? It's a very interesting, very original, delicious proxy made by a winemaker, but that isn't trying to be wine. But I think that I think that's it's an amazing development if more winemakers start making those kinds of products, because they also have they have a huge amount of knowledge that they can bring to it. So it's only going to lift the category, because they're going to be making good products that have a real let's call it raison d'être.
Well, I would have so much more questions, but I think we're a bit time constrained, so I will go towards the end of the maybe one time I come in Paris and we'll have a proper longer conversation. Absolutely. So at the final section that I would like to go through with you is, I call it Quickfire, because it's where I ask you some quick questions, let's say, and I would like you to answer in as few sentences as you can, so it should be a really quick exchange.
Okay.
So the first one is February and March 2036. What's happened to IESSI and what's happened to the beverage market in general?
So you said it's March 2036.
36. Yes, 10 years
36. From now. So it's 10 years from now. What's happened to IESSI? So IESSI is let's say, one of the leading alcohol-free aperitifs in the French market. Mm-hmm. Actually, in the European markets, let's be more ambitious. We can do better. And we have not developed new products. We still have remained true to our core two products, the aperitivo and the frizzante. I really believe that is the way to go. And that the beverage market has moved away from the strong distinction between alcoholic and non-alcoholic. And I think that there's going to be a whole range of products that are sort of alcohol-free, very low ABV, medium, normal, let's call it. I think that the future is going to be more diverse. There's going to be kombuchas and proxies and kefirs and things that I haven't probably even heard of yet, but that are traditional somewhere else, and that are going to come here and establish themselves as interesting alternatives.
If you could give 3 tips to a young entrepreneur like you, starting from scratch a beverage brand.
Pay attention to margins. Mm-hmm. I know it sounds like very technical and boring, but it is important, and it's hard to undo. It's easy to add costs into your margin. It's hard to take them away. So think about that very, very carefully before you launch. Don't worry about the fact that you maybe don't know entirely what you're doing. It's normal. You're gonna try things that work, that don't work, but ask everyone for help. Like, talk to everyone. Talk to as many people as you can. That doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but it's always interesting to hear what they have to suggest. That's 2. And the third one is have fun. Also, like, it's easy. Like, when, again, I talked earlier about, like, we had to grow up and become a real brand, and it's easy to sort of move past that initial phase where, like, every single sale is exciting and every single new connection feels like the biggest win in the world. You kind of get into that middle area where you realize you have something that has enormous potential, but you aren't there yet, and so very quickly you get frustrated. You're like, well, why haven't I gotten there yet? Why are we not bigger? Why am I not doing more sales? Why am I not? Like, let go of that. Let go of that. Enjoy. Try to keep enjoying the wins. You don't get numb to your own success.
So let's say you wake up tomorrow and you find out you inherited a winery, maybe in Trieste, in Friuli, that area. Which are the first three things you do, excluded selling it?
Oh, no, of course I would never sell it. My God. I guess if I inherited a winery, I'd have to learn how to make wine. I mean, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
But oh boy, that's a hard question. I would just enjoy being there. I would be like, this is the coolest thing in the whole world. I would learn to make wine. I'd build a bunch of guest rooms so all my friends can come visit. Maybe I'd make a Yessi bar. Although it seems like it'd be a hard ask to get people to like, drive out to a winery for that. But I think that would be really cool. So yeah, there you go.
Indeed. And linked to this, which are three things you think every winemaker, or maybe you in this, let's say, dream as a winemaker, could learn from Yessi?
I think we could learn that pay attention to the little details, especially when it comes to branding, right? Those little elements make a big difference in the overall perception, even if you don't see the individual detail. Don't forget to have fun. I know I said that already, but that's an important one. And focus on connections with real people. Like it's very tempting to just be like, oh, the internet, I can just scale if I do it right. I mean, maybe, but I think it's not really the point, honestly. And it's much more interesting to focus on like, how do I use this brand to then like make connections, meet people, be in the real world, and have fun doing it. So there you go.
So, yeah, complete the sentence. The beverage industry would be much better off if it stopped.
I mean, I don't know if you want to like turn this into a forum for talking about like, there's lots of kind of toxic behavior in the hospitality industry overall. I'm fairly lucky to have never really had to deal with it like totally frontally, but it's there, it's at the edges, you see it, you hear about it. It's definitely getting better. I think that that's the main thing. I think people, we forget that like in the word hospitality is like hospitality, right? Like it's about making people feel welcome,
Yeah.
and not just the guests, but like the people you work with. Again, I hesitate in giving that answer because it's not like I have some horror story about when I worked in the kitchen. I don't. I've sort of seen it from afar, but I think that is going to be the cultural shift that we see in the next couple of years.
And the final one, your favorite drink, but you cannot tell me anything related to Yessi.
My go-to drink is a vermouth tonic.
Very cool, which in the end is what you try to replicate, no?
Is what I try to replicate exactly. But that's always been my go-to drink when I go to a bar. Yeah.
Nicolas, it's been a really great conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Giovanni. This was a real pleasure.